Okay, so still inside the referenced file here, so if you just go to the reference editor, you can see that we're working in the animation file. So it's again just like loading in a texture. Just going to look at this barrier rig, load him in, and then apply an animation to the names of these curves. So what I'm going to do here is just set a few keys. Rotate this guy about. And I didn't have auto key on, so I'll just switch that back on. I'm not going to do a great job at the animation, but you can see that we've got things moving in there basically. So I'm just going to save this, and I've got this folder for reference files. So as you can see here, I've got my project files, which is the snail. Inside the scenes I've got a folder called animation, and inside there I've got a folder called ref files for all the reference files, so I'd have all the different characters, any sets that you have in there, any large props, and then I'd probably have a folder for each shot of animation. So in here I'll just save the file. So now what we can do is we can actually go inside this barrier rig and see if we can actually edit this and see what happens when we reload this animation file. So I'm just going to open up the barrier rig. So we'll just go to the reference files, open up barrier 1, and we've already saved this, so I'll just save it again. Okay, so we're now inside the barrier rig that file is referencing. So this is much like, say like that animation file it had a shader in it that had a texture, and it was loading that texture in. So this is like if we opened up Photoshop and edited that texture, we're opening up the rig and editing the rig, and then if anything in that animation file, all it's going to do is load this rig. So much like loading a texture, it doesn't care what you've done to that's external, it just loads it straight in. So anything we do to this barrier rig now, the animation file is just going to load it in. The only thing you don't want to do is rename these, because all it does is takes the animation keys and assigns it to the names of the curves. So if I rename this, that's when it does get confused, because it won't be able to find this object. So it won't be able to apply the global control animation to the global control of the rig. So one thing I'm actually going to do in here once we've got them open is I usually have something called a center of gravity control, which is usually for the upper body, so the entire upper body can pivot on the hips. So for this character it's a bit different, but we can see here that we align these controls with the spine, so we can get these nice rotations in here. So we can rotate along the axis of his spine, because unlike a human spine or a lot of other spines which are quite, even the biology of them, they do bend a bit like our spine does bend in and out, but generally it's sort of like a tube is our body going up, or if it's a horse it's going along. With this snail character it's coming from the tip of his tail all the way up to his chest, and then all the way up to his head. So this mid control has been aligned so we can get that nice twist in there. But for a lot of the animation, we can see here the move tool. If I just press W, left click, and actually put it to the object mode, the object's rotation, sorry, we can see here that the axis is aligned with that spine. So actually if I wanted to move in the Z direction, we can see actually we're not moving forward, we're moving at an angle. So this might make the animation a bit annoying. It won't affect it too much. We could always just go back to the world, but you can see by moving in Z, I'm actually moving in Y and Z. So that's going to set 2 keyframes to edit, to curves, in the animation, the graph editor. So it's going to be just a bit annoying. So what we can actually do here is add a center of gravity control, which will basically be the center of gravity of the mass, which will be probably the same pivot of this control here, but it will be used to move the bulk of the upper body. So to do this, what I'm going to do is create a curve. So create a circle curve, and we can just reset the settings, and we'll just hold X to snap it to the grid. Let's rotate that, scale it up a bit. and I'll duplicate this. So what I like to do is, again, I like the curves to look like what they are, so it's easier to understand, and also so it's consistent with all the rigs I make. So the centre of gravity, you can abbreviate that to COG, so C-O-G. So what I tend to do is just make this look like a cog, because when I'm animating I can see the cog in my head. I just think centre of gravity, so it just becomes intuitive. So I'm going to set this to linear in the attribute editor, the channel box even, and just set the sections to 20. So what we can do here is, all I'm going to do, because we've set the sections to 20 and linear, I'm just going to select 2, miss 2, select 2, miss 2. So I'm just selecting the CVs, each 2 CVs and missing 2 CVs. And then I'll just scale these in. So we get that sort of cog look. So I can just look at that, that's a cog. If I select that, that's going to be the centre of gravity control. So I can do the same with these, start renaming them, CC underscore COG, and this will be the upper body. I'll just put upper body in it. Delete the history, freeze transformations. I'm going to select the smaller control and just parent it to that, and then in the drawing overrides, so I'll just go to display, drawing overrides, enable, and just put it template. So just giving that look of a cog. You could do the same with other controls, get it to parent this shape to the other control, but I'll just leave it like that. Or even actually I'll probably set to reference instead. That way it's sort of black. It's more, you can see it more. So also for this control, I'm going to set it to yellow because it's got quite a large influence. So again, the conventions of this rig, something that's yellow has a large influence. And because we're removing control, this had a large influence before because it could move the entire upper body. But because we're going to be relinquishing control of the upper body from this control, and we're going to give it to the cog, I'm going to actually change the colour of this now. So we find the chest. If we remember, it might not work whilst we've got it in this layer here, so I'm just going to remove it from selected layer, remove selected object, and that way we're not going to have any issues about changing the override of this. And I'm going to switch this to red, because again in this rig red is the upper body controls. So I'm going to do this on the shape as well. So we can see we've changed that. I'll re-add it to the layer. I'll add this one to the layer as well, this cog. See, it's changed the colour, so we just need to remember to enable overrides on the shape, because the layer is going to override that colouring if it's just applied, you know, to the curve instead of the curved shape. Okay, so I'm just going to get this into some sort of position that I like. That should do. And just display the local rotative axes of this control. So I'll just hide polygons. I'm just going to take this cog control, press insert, vert snap to the local rotative axis of the chest control. Then again I'll freeze transformations. I can get rid of the local rotative axes of that control. Okay, so I'm just going to frame up the chest control. It's got the rotate offset, so we're remembering to frame it up, not just select the curve and parent. We want to check if it's got that rotate offset. So with the rotate offset selected, I'm going to select the cog, and hit P. I always want to remember that this cog has been created outside, so we want to remember to move this back into the control objects because it's a new curve. So the reason I've parented this is if I wanted to move the chest separately, I just probably wouldn't animate this control down here. So I don't really need a follow attribute for this, because if I'm wanting to move the chest separately, or if I ever animate the cog, I will always want the chest to follow along. You know, that's the whole point of this cog control, so I can move this in Z and it's only moving it in 1. So it's more of a set to the world rotation and translation. So if I move the cog, I will always want to move this chest control, so we don't really need to add a follow attribute. But what we'll need to do is, if I do parent these upper body controls, so you can see they're in a group, but if I parent this group to the cog, what's going to happen is you're going to get some double transformations. So that means it's going to happen twice, whatever we do. So if I move this, say like 6 in Z, that's going to move the chest control 6 in Z because it's a child of the cog. But because the chest control drives the follow attribute of these upper body controls, it's going to also take that 6, and with the follow attribute on, it's going to also, as you can see, it's translated these 6 in Z. But then if we parent this group that contains the upper body, if we parent that to the cog, that means the follow attribute is telling it to move 6, and the cog, as its parent in the hierarchy, is also telling it to move 6. So in effect, it'll move 12 in Z. So to avoid that, what we actually want to do is we don't want to parent this upper body control. We'll just leave it as it is. And what we will do instead is, if we open up the extra nodes, and we'll display the extra nodes to hide. And if you remember, the follow attribute was driven by this tie control. So the tie control follows the chest control, and all the follow of the upper body is derived by the values in this tie control. So all I actually need to do is just delete this parent constraint on the tie control. So I'll just press F there, select the tie control, press F in the outliner to frame it up. I'll expand it. I accidentally deleted the name, but we can see under here it's got a constraint, so I'll just hit delete on that. So we can see now there's no blue in here, there's no parent constraint, so in actual fact it's not constrained to the chest control anymore. And ideally we should have done this before we moved the cog forward, so it's in its default position, but because we've moved it, we've only moved that, it should be okay if we parent constraint this now. So all I'm actually going to do is select the cog, select the tie control, and again animation, constraint, and parent. And I'll just make sure we're parent constraining both translate and rotate, and just hit apply. So what this now means is the upper body controls derive their follow attribute from the cog now. So this means if I move the cog, it's 6 in translate Z, that's just going to go straight to the upper body. There's no information coming from the chest control anymore, so we're not getting double transformations. And the reason I don't want to parent this upper body control is now we can see it's moving with the cog, so I can reset this back to 0. It's going to move and rotate, but we also have the ability to switch it off. So I'm setting the follow chest to 0, and you can see now it's not following along. So we could rename that follow center of gravity if we want, but I'm just going to leave it as normal because it does actually follow the chest. If you think about it, if we switch it on, it's not linked to the chest, but if we show the mesh, as far as the animator is concerned, if it's on, this upper body is following the general mesh of this area. It's not connected that way in the rig, but it just appears that way, so it makes more sense just to have it called chest control. But now we have the center of gravity control, it means that if we do put the follow chest on, the animation is going to be a lot easier because we can rotate in world space. So especially with this chest control, so we've still got the ability to rotate the chest control along the axes of the spine, which is what we want to keep. We wanted that rotate offset group, but now we also have the ability to simplify the animation. So a lot of the character's motion will be swiveling from left to right, you know, if he was looking, if he was talking to someone, or if he was swaying backwards and forwards, you know, back and forth. And then again with the animation, moving in Z, just key in one axis, it's going to be a lot more simple. So this just gives the animator a lot more control. It's going to be really simple, you know, simple to animate with this control, and then we can layer on that extra animation of the twist. So basically we're just layering these controls, so the cog is going to be the bulk movement of the character, where this, you know, where this character is going to be, how he's going to be looking, how he's going to be posed, what angle he's at, and then these free controls are just to finesse that pose. So this is the bulk, he's going to be angled down here, and then how is he going to be angled? He's not going to be at a straight line. We want to rotate along the spine, so you can see, you know, we've got that rotation still aligned, and then we can get like a nice arc in there. So we could move this round and get a smooth twist in there. So the cog centre of gravity is just the bulk movement of the entire upper body, and then these, you know, finesse the pose. Okay, so I'm just going to reset these back to 0, so we've got them in the default pose. And then again, we can always tell the upper body not to follow the cog. So it's just entirely up to the animator. Okay, so I'm going to go to the extra nodes, extra to hide, and hide it again, because we don't need to see it. Just check everything's... And again, we could add another cog control for the tail, so you can see how the end of the tail doesn't follow the start of the tail. You know, we could add another cog control down here, so we can get the entire rotation of the tail rotating around the chest if we wanted to. But for the animation for this, it's not going to be too complicated in the tail, so I'm probably going to leave it with just the front cog control. And then if we do want to move everything together, we can just use the global control. Okay, so I'm just going to hit save, and you might not be, the video might cut this off, so you might not be able to see the bar at the top, but this has actually been saved as the reference file. You know, we can see it down here actually. So this has been saved as the animation / reference file Barry01 rig. So we've just saved it in, you know, that reference file folder. And if you remember in the previous tutorial, the animation file we made references the Barry rig, the Barry01 file. So much like a texture loaded through Maya, we've just edited this rig, saved it. We can just go to a new scene. I'll save it again, and then we can just open up our animation file. And if everything works correctly, what we should see is it will load in the rig, and it will apply the same keys we set at the start of this animation. So we've actually added that cog control. So we've added to the rig. So now open it up. Hopefully there shouldn't be any problems. So we'll just go to so we saved it in Shot01. And another advantage is if you look at the file size of these animation files, because they don't save the rig, they don't save the mesh, they don't save any shaders that you make in the, you know, the rig file, the reference file. Basically this file only contains animation data, so it's really small. So this means, you know, when you're animating, you want to save, you know, every couple of minutes, you know, avoid crashes, you know, keep saving incrementally. So this means saving incrementally, you could have hundreds of files and the file size is really small. If you had a file that had 3 characters and you actually imported all the characters, so that scene file physically had all those character rigs, those character meshes, saving it is going to start adding a lot of file size. You're going to get gigabytes of files. Okay, so in here you can see reference editor, reloading Barry rig 01. You can see it's got the same pose. These keys are still working. This amazing animation is still working, and you can actually see we now have this cog control. So we've edited the rig, and Maya has just loaded it in, and just had no problems. So you can see that the power of referencing means we now have the ability to keep editing the rig, and like we said, this was done in a folder shot or one. So for example, if this snail is going to be used in quite a lot of shots by different animators, you could have 100 shots, and if you all of a sudden realised you missed the cog control, or the animators had problems, they wanted to add something to the rig, or they requested, they found problems with skinning in the elbows or something, they could tell the rigger, we've got these problems. He could just update the rig and then resend out a new rig file, and all they would do is, in the reference folder, delete the old rig file, paste in the new one with the same file name, and then all the animation files will reference the new rig. And because we haven't renamed any of these controls, as you can see, any animation they've done is going to apply straight to the rig straight away. So it's going to be seamless, we're going to have no problems, and it's going to save a lot of time. So worst case scenario, you had a skinning issue on the elbow. If you had, 10 different shots that have had some animation that's taken weeks of work, if you wanted to reskin these elbows, you would have to either open up each file, reskin it, or use a few time-saving tools like skinning this, exporting the skinning weights, and then each one of those files re-importing the new skinning weights. But that can cause a lot of problems, it can take a lot of time, so just referencing saves so much time. And again, another advantage is if we have several different characters that use, they have several different character meshes, there might be male, there might be female, there might be children, there might be adults, but as long as they use the same name for the controls, the rigs might even work in different ways. One might have an even more advanced ribbon spine on the armour, it might not even have a ribbon spine on its arm at all, it might just be a normal spine, it might have muscle systems. As long as it uses the same control names, we could just replace this rig with another rig, and using the same names, all it's going to do is take the animation, apply it to the corresponding control name. So if that rig had the same name, CC left wrist or 1, it would apply the animation to that, and then that would drive all these muscles or a different type of rig. So this basically means that quite quickly you can just reuse animation and just basically get it onto different characters. Okay, so that's just reaffirming how useful the referencing is and how we can add different controls, and this is probably the last control we're going to add for this character. So it's pretty much complete.